Hey team, I haven't been able to stop thinking about this book since I read it, and I'm gonna use this video as an outlet for all of my thoughts. So buckle up, because I've got a lot to geek out on. Now, a major part of who I am is being a fangirl. Once I find a piece of media that I like, whether it be music, sports, movies, books, TV shows, I immediately have to immerse myself in every aspect of it. I'm looking up edits on YouTube and TikTok. I'm making all my friends learn about it so we can discuss it together. I'm looking up fan art on Pinterest. I'm going down rabbit hole threads on Twitter, and I'm a huge nerd, so I've even gone as far as writing an essay for fun because I have to organize my thoughts. And we fangirls really had our peak in like the 2012-2015 era, so it should come as no surprise that I am indeed a huge Hunger Games fan. And I've been super excited for Suzanne Collins's new prequel to the series, Sunrise on the Reaping, which I will be reviewing today. It tells the story of Katniss's mentor Haymitch Abernathy's participation in the 50th Hunger Games. Warning, this review is going to contain spoilers, and it probably won't make a lot of sense if you haven't read it, because I'm not gonna like recap the book, I'm just giving my thoughts on it. So highly, highly, highly recommend you go read this first. But if you don't care about spoilers, then watch at your own risk, okay? You've been warned. I'm just gonna start with a rating right off the bat, which, given the fact that I'm making a YouTube video about this, it probably comes as no surprise that I'm giving it 5 out of 5 stars. I personally was hooked from the very first page, and I think it says a lot about this book that even though it's a prequel and we know how the main character story ends, I was still on the edge of my seat. It felt like I was going in blind because we only know the version of Haymitch after the games. And so we meet this completely different character. So I was super interested in learning how and why he became the character that we do know. I think that the level of anticipation and excitement and intrigue that I felt is very hard to do with a prequel. But in my opinion, this book did it well. And I've heard some complaints that this book is just a cash grab fan service book, which even if it was fan service, who cares? I'm a fan and I loved being serviced. Sue me. I don't think it was just fan service. The fact that there are some familiar characters makes sense because this book is only set 24 years before the original story, and it's a pretty small community, so obviously the main characters are gonna probably run in the same circles as the original trilogy. But even if it was just fan service, that doesn't make the book meaningless or take away the very real messages and themes. So there are 2 main reasons why I really enjoyed this book that I'm going to be going into further detail on, and those are the themes and the character parallels. I'm going to start by talking about the themes. When I say theme, I'm talking about like the literary device. It means message. So what point is the author trying to get across? As I've stated, I am a huge nerd, so I have taken the liberty of coming up with 2 thematic statements for the book. At least from my interpretation. And the first one is, any level of propaganda is dangerous, and even if you think you're smart enough to be immune to it and its effects on society, you are not. So propaganda is a very obvious method of control that the capital uses against the districts to keep them in line. They have slogans across every district like, "No peacekeepers, no peace," that are meant to uphold the necessity of the militaristic rule that the capital has. The whole concept of the Hunger Games is propaganda. It's an annual reminder that the districts will never be able to overpower the capital. And propaganda isn't just used by the capital, it's used by the rebellion too. Katniss's role as the Mockingjay is propaganda. It's used so thoroughly throughout Panem that they created a shorthand for any video that goes out to all the citizens called propos, short for propaganda. And us as readers view propaganda in the Hunger Games as something blatantly obvious. It's a dystopian series, so it's meant to feel extreme to us because the book is set in a far-off future. What I find impressive about Suzanne's writing in the series is how strong the capital's propaganda is. It's so strong that people didn't think we needed Haymitch's prequel games because we already get the gist of how Haymitch's games ended in Catching Fire. In the book Catching Fire, when Katniss and Peeta are reviewing old game footage in order to prepare for the Quarter Quell, they learn about Haymitch's games. His final opponent throws an axe at the force field, which Haymitch dodges, and then when it hits the force field, it ricochets off and ends up killing the career. So if we know how Haymitch's games ended, then why do we need a whole book about him? But that's just the thing. We didn't know how Haymitch's games ended. We knew the Capitol's version, and we accepted it to be true. We fell for the Capitol's propaganda. We didn't know about Haymitch's relationships with his fellow tributes from District 12 and how he viewed them as a family. We didn't know that Haymitch was a part of an alliance with all the other underdog districts, the first of its kind. We didn't know that Haymitch was on a secret mission to blow up the arena as an act of rebellion against the Capitol. And we didn't know that right after he won using the force field, he blew himself up in an attempt to kill himself because he didn't want to live with the aftermath of failing to rebel against Snow. And even when I got to the part in the book where Haymitch is finally sitting down and watching the Capitol's version of his games, I was fully in denial and underestimated just how much they were going to twist his character. They cast him as a selfish, standoffish lone wolf that only cared about proving he could win. They wiped out any semblance of empathy, humility, and kindness that we know he had. Snow in the Capitol knew that his life as a victor was going to be a punishment. So they twisted him into whatever character they needed to help cover up the fact that he almost blew up their whole operation. In the end, Haymitch was just another piece in Snow's games. And so you get so lost in rooting for this character, at least me personally, completely forgetting the fate that he was destined to, just like Haymitch is in the middle of his games thinking that he can win against the Capitol, but he can't. The Capitol still has all the power. And so lies my first thematic statement. Any level of propaganda is dangerous, and even if you think you're smart enough to be immune to it and its effects on society, you are not. Moving on to the second key point, in my opinion, preserving literature and accurate, honest history as a form of required education is vital to our function as a just society. One of the most interesting characters in the Hunger Games to me is Plutarch Heavensbee. We learn a lot more about his character in this book and just how much of a big role he played in the revolution. We learn that he comes from a very powerful, very well-known, and highly respected family in the Capitol. And he's one of the only people from the Capitol that we see actively trying to fight against Snow. So what made him different? How was he able to see past the Capitol's brainwashing for the tyranny that it was? Well, this book reveals that the Heavensbee family was one of the only families in the Capitol to prioritize preserving their library. During the dark days of the first rebellion that started the Hunger Games, many residents of the Capitol were burning their books in order to keep fire and warmth, but the Heavensbees never resorted to that. They valued literature, they valued preserving their books, and so they kept their very extensive library. And so we as readers can assume that's the reason why Plutarch was able to see past the propaganda. Plutarch was a Capitol citizen that wanted to fight for a better Panem, and the only difference in his upbringing in the Capitol was his access to books and history and being able to learn from it. I think it's pretty clear what Suzanne Collins is trying to say here. The Hunger Games is a book series that has been banned in many countries, including the United States. It's a series that's seen as too political, too much social commentary, so some people think it should be banned from libraries. But by banning books that teach people to question authority and to think critically about standing up for what they believe is right, it's a step towards the dystopian world that Suzanne Collins writes about. Without books, without stories that make us think about our place in the world, without history being easily accessible for us to learn from the mistakes of our past, it becomes all too easy to start going backwards as a society instead of forwards. And so my second thematic statement stands: preserving literature and accurate, honest history as a form of required education is vital to our function as a just society. Those are the two themes that I took away from this book. I think they're very valuable. Now let's get into the second reason why I love this book so much, and that is the character parallels. First and foremost, we have the very obvious parallel between Haymitch and Katniss. They're both kids from the seam, they're eldest children with a single mother, and they're taking care of their younger sibling. And they are both, at their core, survivalists. They are just trying to take it day by day and make sure that them and their loved ones can live. And sure, they recognize the unfairness of the world that they're living in, but they don't have any huge aspirations to fight back because that would go against their number one goal of just staying alive. Then we have their respective love interests that also reflect one another, Lenore Dove and Peeta Mellark. These are two people that help Haymitch and Katniss look at the bigger picture. They both spark that change and motivation for Haymitch and Katniss to eventually go against the Capitol. So first there's Lenore Dove and Haymitch. The metaphor Haymitch uses in the book is that There's bound to be another reaping, just as sure as the sun will rise in the morning. But when he tells Lenore Dove this, she pushes back and challenges Haymitch to question his thinking. She wants him to see that just because this is the way things are, doesn't mean it's the way they have to be and will always be forever. Lenore Dove has always had a very rebellious spirit. She doesn't care about surviving, she wants to fight back. And the only reason why Haymitch fights so hard to win in his Hunger Games is because he knows that's what Lenore Dove would want of him. The main reason why he decides to seek out people like Beetee and Mags and Ryrus to ask them about fighting back and destroying the arena is because Lenore Dove is that voice in his head telling him he should do it. He's constantly thinking about how he can please Lenore Dove by stopping the sun from rising on another reaping. And the only reason why he keeps going and keeps living after Snow has killed his brother and his mother and Lenore Dove is because on Lenore's deathbed he made a promise to her that he would still somehow keep trying to find a way. Lenore Dove's motivation is his only reason left for living. And then comes in Katniss, who is just as stubborn as Haymitch, just as much as a survivalist. She only wants to win the game so she can come back and keep on protecting her little sister and her family. The only difference in their acts of rebellion is that Katniss is a lot more emotionally closed off than Haymitch. So even when she's in the middle of her rebellion with the berries, she's not fully aware that that's specifically what she's trying to do. In that moment, it's just kind of a voice in the back of her head reminding her about what Peeta told her, that I don't want to be another piece in their games. And so Katniss and Haymitch both rebelled, but not necessarily just for the sake of their own interests. Their acts of rebellion were inspired by the people that they love pushing them to fight for a better world. Now, Haymitch's rebellion failed. And so when we see that initial spark of defiance in Katniss, if they wanted to win this time, they knew they had to be carefully stoking the flames of the fire to make sure it didn't burn out. Katniss was the girl on fire, the Mockingjay, but Haymitch was the fire starter. This token, the fire starter that he had in the games, I think that's a very obvious metaphor for the fact that he placed the first stepping stones of the revolution that Katniss would eventually take over. Katniss was the girl on fire, Haymitch was the fire starter. In order for Katniss to succeed, the rebels first had to fail with Haymitch. And so with Katniss, they kept her very far out of the loop because they knew if Snow had any inkling of her actively defying him and trying to rebel, he would wipe it out at the first chance. And Haymitch himself acknowledges their similarities in the epilogue. Katniss is exactly like him, but a little luckier and a little smarter. Katniss was lucky that she had Seneca Crane as a game maker who leaned too much into the entertainment aspect of the games and not as a way to enforce fear on the districts. And Katniss was smart enough to recognize the poison berries and save Peeta, but Haymitch wasn't smart enough to recognize the poison in the gumdrops that he fed Lenore Dove that killed her. Katniss and Haymitch are truly two sides of the same coin, and I could go on and on about them forever, but those are my main points. I think by making these two characters so similar, Suzanne Collins added a lot of good context to just how long this rebellion has been going on. It makes you question as a reader, how many other failed rebellions have there been across the history of the games? When you're reading the original trilogy, it's easy to get so laser focused on just the main characters, but this book recontextualizes everything and makes you realize just how important every step of the revolution has been. I would argue that the same way that the Capitol came into power was ultimately its fatal flaw in losing its power. Because the Capitol wiped out an accurate history of the districts in order to create the propaganda to control and manipulate its citizens. No peacekeepers, no peace. No Hunger Games, no peace. We have to have the Hunger Games because it keeps the districts in line. This is a form of punishment, it's a form of fear. But then, as the games go on, they keep evolving. And it's turned into entertainment instead of fear tactic. Snow realizes this in Katniss's trilogy, and he tries to force that fear again, but it's too late. And his paranoia in overcorrecting by doing the third quarter quell as the existing pool of victors, he's slowly deteriorating the Capitol's perspective of him. Because if you tell all the citizens that we just need to pull tributes from the kids, and once you win, you're a victor and you're safe. But now you're sending all the victors that all these Capitol people rooted for back into the arena? Snow did that because he knew the victors were the ones leading the rebellions. But in doing so, there wasn't enough Capitol propaganda to stop its citizens from realizing that's kind of messed up. These are supposed to be victors. And PETA, if it weren't for the baby Malark, helps with this. All the victors going into the Quarter Quell try to humanize themselves as much as possible, and it works. Snow's paranoia and overcorrection led to doubt in his citizens, a doubt that probably helped turn people to the rebellion side. And so over time, because he let people forget the history of the games, they were able to move on from his rule. So forgetting your history under any type of leadership can ultimately lead to its downfall. I could talk about this book and this world and this universe forever, but I'm gonna leave it at that. I loved it. I think it added a lot to the original series. I think it was a great social commentary. If you read this and have your own thoughts, feel free to argue with me in the comments. But thanks for watching. Peace.